Welcome to Intelligence Gathering. I'm Horit, and in this session, we're going to be looking at Unit 2, which focuses on cyber intelligence analysis. Let's start our discussion by talking about data. And if we talk about data, then it's going to be important for us to understand what are the qualities of good data. And the syllabus focuses on the CRAP model, where they said that in order to be of good quality, then data has to be current, relevant, it needs to have authority, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to have a purpose. So what does all of this mean? Well, if the data is current, then it means that it is timely. So we have the data whenever we need to use the data. And the second thing here is relevance. So how well does the data meet our needs? Can we make use of the data? So it not only has to be timely, but it also has to be relevant. Thirdly, authority. Where are we getting the data from? Is it coming from a credible source? Can this data be trusted? And closely related to authority is accuracy. Is the data true? Can it be trusted, as we mentioned earlier? And usually, if the source has great authority, then it usually means that the data can be trusted. And finally, what is the purpose for the data? Why do we even need the data in the first place? What kind of problem does having this data actually help us to solve? So these are some of the things that we look for when we're looking for quality associated with data. However, please bear in mind that this is not an exhaustive list. This is just one metric that is used and that has kind of become a standard. But if we have a look at the list here, we realize that there are several more things that we could target whenever we are looking at data. For example, the completeness of the data. Does it have all the elements that we need so that we can actually make a good decision? And that talks about completeness. Then we can also talk about the consistency of the data. And we can almost tie the consistency with the timeliness of the data. So the data is timely in that we get it when we need it. And if we always get the data whenever we need it, or we can depend on getting that data over time, then that talks about consistency. We also have another graphic here that focuses or illustrates a few other qualities that we would not have covered under the CAP model. But please bear in mind, while you can read it and understand it and even use it as you talk about data, we're focusing on the CAP model because that is what is on the syllabus. We're now moving on to our reliability rating models. There are several of them: 5I, source reliability, credibility assessment, and the information quality model. So what is the 5Is model? Well, there were 5 countries that came together and they kind of signed an agreement that indicate how they would operate with each other with respect to sharing data. So the countries were Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and the United States. And I think this was actually signed in about 2017. Now, what are some of the scope of the agreement? They are able to share information on subjects that have mutual interest and concern. They're able to share best practices. They're able to share results where it is permitted and it is appropriate. So for example, there might be experiments which have been done that create some information or some data, and this might be shared among the various countries who are party to this agreement. There's also transparency, and this is being encouraged so that public trust can be enhanced. And this is important, especially as we talk about things like AI, because the public might not be readily open to AI technologies, the threat of job displacement. And so the more information that is shared and the more transparent the government is in regards to the policies that are being put in place and in regards to the developments that are taking place within the space, then it means that the public will be more trustworthy of what is happening as long as transparency exists. So that wraps it up pretty much for the 5I model. And we can now have a look at source reliability and a metric that we can actually use to track this. So when we talk about sources of information, sources of data, then it would be nice for us to have a way of categorizing whether or not the data can be trusted. And remember, for the data to be trusted, it therefore means that the source has to be trusted. So there is a metric that has been going around, creating a standard, and this allows us to classify the source. So is it completely reliable? Can we take this information coming from this source as gospel? Because over time it has proven to be credible. Or is it usually reliable? So sometimes it may not give us the kind of what data quality that we need, but however, generally, maybe 80%, 90% of the time, the information the source generates would be good. Is it fairly reliable? Is it not usually reliable? Is it unreliable? Or are we at the stage where we cannot judge the reliability of this source? So we don't have enough evidence, enough data for us to actually put a rating on this source. So this is a very useful tool in terms of being able to classify or determining whether or not the data source that we have at our disposal are data sources that can be trusted. And remember, we spoke a bit earlier about data quality. And just as a reminder, these are some of the qualities that we can look at. And this would feed into what is known as the information quality model. So that's something that we would have discussed prior. Now we are looking at trust. And this is where we are now focusing on the credibility assessment matrix. And if something is going to be credible, then of course it has to be trustworthy. And there are two pillars that give credence to trust. One being character, and the other thing being competence. Competence is, are we able to do what we say we can do with the right amount of performance, with the right amount of efficacy? Whereas character is speaking about who we are. Can we be trusted? So whenever we look at these two prongs, these two pillars, character and competence, we can break it down to these discrete elements. What is the intent of the source, of the person? Does that source have integrity? And also, what are the capabilities of this person or this source? And what are the results which have been generated, especially over time? So the blue items speak to competence. The green items speak to character. So how do we put this into practice? Well, for character, we ensure that we always tell the truth. We show respect to others. We ensure that we are transparent. If we have wronged persons, then we right those wrongs. And we ensure that we display a great sense of loyalty. So these are some of the ways in which we can demonstrate integrity as well as intent. For competence, then some of the behaviors are ensuring that results are being generated. We're always getting better, which shows that there is growth and there's progress. We face reality. If we have clarifications, then if we have expectations, then we clarify them. And we ensure that we always practice accountability. And there are some here which are great, and they are great because they don't nicely fit into one or two of the categories, but they can really span across them. And things like listening, being empathetic, that helps develop trust when persons realize that we take the time to understand. Then there's also the issue of keeping commitments. Are we doing what we say we would do when we say we would do it? This helps others to know that we can be trusted. And also to extend trust. If we trust people first, then they will try to reciprocate that in most cases and extend trust to us as well. So in other words, let us give persons the benefit of the doubt. And these are some of the things that we can use to ensure that we have a high trust factor within an organization. As a matter of fact, there's this book, The Speed of Trust, that talks about trust. And the basic principle of the book is that in organizations, if there's trust, then they're able to do things quicker. They have less problems. They're able to be more productive simply because trust is baked into the fabric of the organization. So we're now moving on, and we are now focusing on shell utilities for OSINT. And when we talk about the shell, we're really talking about Linux. So we are using Linux as our primary OS because it provides some tools that allows us to navigate better in terms of security aspect. So the shell utilities are curl, awk, sed, and JQ. And what we will now do is to provide an overview of these technologies. And somewhere in the lab sessions, then you will be given the opportunity to experiment with these tools. In order to talk about all of this, though, we need to have an understanding of what an API is. And the term API means Application Programmable Interface. And what this is simply a protocol that allows software components to be able to share data or communicate with each other. In the graphic here, there's some server that has some resources that we need to access as clients. And we are over here as the client. And in order to get the information from the server, we are going to send a request. When we're talking about an API, the request is really an HTTP request. And there are 4 distinct possibilities or 4 commands that can be used: get, post, delete, and put. In order to send this request, however, we need to target a URL. And specifically to the URL, there's going to be the ending of the URL, which is classified as an endpoint. So what we're going to do is to send a request to an endpoint. And if we format this request properly, then the server will generate some response or some payload. And this payload is usually in a format known as JSON format, which is a key paired kind of format. There's a key, in other words. So if we look here, we say a key called survey ID. And then there's a value that is associated with that key. In this case, the value is 123. So it is these key paired values which are then being sent back as data back to the client so that it can be processed. Now, the 4 HTTP requests that we spoke about earlier are often used to do CRUD operations. And CRUD operation is a way in which we target external data sources like files and databases. And it allows us to either create data by using a post command, read data by using the get command, update data. So I want to change something. For example, we want to change the score from 9 to 12. So that would be an update command. And we issue that by using the put keyword. And we can also delete, meaning we are deleting data. And that's the delete HTTP command. So let's now move into the curl command, and talk about it briefly. So we just spoke about API. And what curl does is it provides us with a command line interface that allows us to send these API requests. So we can communicate with a server, in other words, by making use of this curl tool. And the syntax is pretty simple. We issue the curl command followed by some URL. And the URL is usually broken down into the base URL as well as the endpoint that we were talking about earlier. We also need to specify the kind of command, HTTP command, that we are generating. In this case, it's a post request. And we can specify some data that is necessary in this post request. So in this case, it is formatted in JSON format. And usually there's some header information that we need to send as well. For example, we might need to send some sort of authorization information so that we can be authorized or verified. And that would be placed inside of the header. The other thing that we want to have a look at is the JQ command. And what the JQ command does is it allows us to process information that is found within a JSON file and quickly filter through and find information. So that's what is being depicted here by this graphic. We're using JQ to query some sort of JSON file and return a truncated set of the data that is there. In this example, we are using the JQ command. We are looking for the element that says favorite color. And we want to ensure that the favorite color is blue. We're also extracting another piece of information based on the age. And we said that the age has to be 36. So either the age is 36 or the color is blue. And the source that we are querying, the JSON source that we are querying, is going to be the file called tony.json. And what we have here in JSON format is the output that we would have obtained from this tony.json file. So this is just an example of how we can go about making use of the JQ query or the JQ command. And once again, in the practical session, you'll have a chance to do something related to this. So you get some practice. There are some other commands which are typically used, like sed. And sed is most often used to do text manipulation. and we can use it to replace text within a file. This is something that you are going to research, but just note that it allows us to modify the contents of the file. We also have grep that allows us to search through a file by using pattern matching or pattern recognition. This is also something that you will be researching and experimenting with. And finally, we have the awk command. And the awk command allows us to be able to look through a file and target information that is within particular columns. And once again, this is something that you will be exploring within your lab session. So just note, please, that these tools are available and can understand or appreciate what they are used for. And finally, we want to look at how can we use Python to do particular tasks which are important in terms of data collection and data analysis. And one of the things that we will find is that the Python programming language is a rich ecosystem, especially when it comes to performing data analysis. So we have web scraping libraries like Scrappy that allows us to go out there on websites and extract the information from the website so that it can be analyzed. And if we look at ChatGPT, you know that it has been trained on data that is out there on the web. And this is one way in which the data could have been obtained by using tools like Scrappy to search these sites, extract the information from the site, format it, and then use it to train the ChatGPT models. Another thing that is important from a Python standpoint, if we're going to use it to the data analysis, is that we should be able to connect to a database and extract information from that database. And also update it using the same CRUD operations that we would have spoken about earlier. And just suffice it to say, as depicted by this graphic, that we are able to use the Python language to connect to databases like a MySQL database. And in this case, we are connecting to the database and we are extracting information from the database by making use of something known as an SQL query. So this is saying we are selecting all the data, all the information from a particular table in the database called teacher. And once we get those records, those pieces of information, then we are going to loop through it and display the results. So that is possible using Python. Another thing that is important when we are making use of Python is that we can query other data sources apart from databases. For example, a CSV file, which is known as a comma-separated file. In this case, though, instead of commas, we are separating the data using the semicolon, which is also permissible, because with a CSV file, we can choose the delimiter that we use to separate the data values. It can be commas, semicolons, colons, a dash, etc. So we have the option of specifying that. To note, though, that for this data to be processed, it has to be formatted in a way that it is easy to get access to the different data points. And we usually do that by formatting it in terms of rows and columns. So think about an Excel spreadsheet. And what Python does is that it has this package or this utility known as pandas that is able to read a CSV file, store it in memory, almost as if it's an Excel sheet, meaning it's going to now store the data in terms of rows and columns. Note, we can strip out the data. We can split it based on the delimiter, which in this case would have been a comma, but it could have also been the colon as was demonstrated in the CSV file above. And then what that will do is to break up the data format it in terms of rows and columns so that we can now get access to the data to do our different analysis. And as you see here being displayed in the graphic, what is being illustrated here by this code is that we opened a file. So open a file for reading. The name of the file was details.txt. By the code, we realized that it's a comma separated file because we see here that there is the comma. And then what we're going to do is now to break up all of that data and store it in a pandas data frame so that it now is being represented in rows and columns without those delimiters in it. And this format now makes it easy for us to start to query the data and analyze it. And that brings us to the end of Unit 2. Please stay tuned for Unit 3.